It's finally here, ladies and gentlemen. Game day, the kickoff of the 2024 NFL season is upon us. And oh, by the way, we're going to have it for you on this show. Before we go off tonight, we will have real NFL football to talk about. Hi, hello, and welcome to the FFPC High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I'm Eric Balkman from the Road to Biz High Stakes Lowdown, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Connect with me on the X at Eric Balkman. Want to welcome back on my good friend Jack Miller from Establish the Run. You know all of his work there when it comes to betting and props and projections. Follow him on the X at JackMiller02. Jack, what a night to be a fantasy football fan. What a night to be a football fan, because we have, for the first time since Las Vegas in the Super Bowl, we have real NFL football to consume tonight, my friend.
Yeah, I'm super excited. About an hour and 15 minutes till kickoff, so I can't wait. It's going to be a great game. Chiefs Ravens. We've got another one tomorrow, and Eagles and Packers, and then we've got a huge slate Sunday, and then we've got 17 more weeks of the regular season. So I'm really excited to be here, and really excited that the off season is finally over and we're finally back.
Yeah, 17 weeks sounds like a long time, but it's going to go by like that. You know, it does every year. Speaking of Las Vegas, that's where I am right now for the Fantasy Football Players Championship live events at Planet Hollywood. And you say, Balky, it doesn't look very glamorous where you are. Well, I'm in my storage closet that I'm doing the show in, that I've done in the last couple of years here. But trust me, I am at Planet Hollywood. The live events have been a huge hit so far. We kicked things off early this morning, 9 a.m. Pacific time. I've already facilitated a couple of drafts, including a $10,000 buy-in high society draft. And if you're looking for action, you don't have to be in Las Vegas to play in the FFPC. Go to myffpc.com. We have the Fantasy Pros Championship, the FFPC main event filling up even after the game tonight. So for you Night Owls, if you want to get in some drafting action after the Chiefs and Ravens complete the game, we'll have drafts starting up at midnight Eastern time, and we'll take you all the way through till tomorrow morning too, as well, when they resume at 10 a.m. Eastern time. So check it out, myffpc.com. For the FFPC main event and the Fantasy Pros Championship. Speaking of the Fantasy Pros Championship, we completed our Labor Day draft-a-thon this past Monday, where we donate $50 for every draft filled to a charity of our choosing every year. This year we picked Casey to the Rescue, which is a dog rescue campaign that our customer service lead, Chris Lambert, is actually in charge of. She drives down from Rochester, New York to Lexington, Kentucky about every other weekend to save dogs, sometimes just hours before they're euthanized. She saved well over 1,000 dogs last year, and we're hoping with the record amount that we raised for the Fantasy Pros Draft-a-thon this year, just over $11,000, we can save even more dogs this year. So thank you to everybody who participated in that, and make sure that if you want to keep supporting Casey to the Rescue, go to caseytotherescue.com, caseytotherescue.com. That's where you can still support that charity even though the draft-a-thon is over. Want to make mention too that myffpc.com is where to go to register for the main event in the Fantasy Pros Championship as well. Jack, let's get into it tonight. The news out of Cincinnati for the second straight day was good. Jamar Chase, who we all know is looking for a new contract, not only practiced yesterday, but he practiced today. And it sounds like, at least all the if you look at the tea leaves, read the tea leaves, I think, or read between the lines, it sounds like Chase is going to be out there against the New England Patriots for Week 1. Now, for those people who have not yet drafted, and people who are going to be drafting at Planet Hollywood here in Las Vegas this weekend, do you bump Jamar Chase up in round 1 at all? And when you look at Week 1 and what you think he's going to do, is there a way to take advantage of maybe a prop of what his yardage is set at or catches, given that he might not be a full go? What are you anticipating as far as a workload and as far as production for Jamar Chase in Week 1?
Yeah, from a season-long perspective, we lowered Chase when it started to get a little bit scary a week ago, and it looked like maybe he was actually in danger. At this point, with the season starting in an hour, we're not as much updating those anymore, the season-long stuff, but I do think you can just get back to drafting him as usual. It seems like he'll be out there Week 1. Ian Rappaport, I think, tweeted an hour or so ago that the Bengals expect to have him out there. In terms of expectations for Week 1, we have him. I think this is a spot we're probably going to discuss more, especially since T. Higgins popped up on the injury report today. But right now, we're at about 95% of what a typical Jamar Chase workload would look like. There's been some reports. I think it was Burrow, or maybe it was Chase himself, who said that he's in game shape. He's ready to go. So I think it's going to be pretty much full go on Chase. We're a little bit conservative with the 95%, just because he did miss so much practice time. But I think that you definitely should not have significantly lower expectations for Chase in week 1.
Yeah, and obviously anybody who's picking him is very excited to hear that, especially considering he has now fallen to the 108 in the Fantasy Pros Championship, with drafts continuing to be going on through Saturday night. So you can get a pretty good deal on Jamar Chase right now if you register for the Fantasy Pros Championship, myffpc.com. Moving on to Kyle Pitts, a guy who was listed as limited in practice yesterday. He got in a full practice today. And he actually went on social media to say, look, guys, relax. I'm fine. My hamstring's good. My soft tissue's in tip-top shape. However, is Kyle Pitts in tip-top shape to return value on his ADP right now in the FFPC main event, which currently stands, as I bring it up here, currently stands at, I thought I had it. I'm sorry. Kyle Pitts, tight end 7 at the 404. New quarterback this year, Jack, in Kirk Cousins, and obviously no Arthur Smith there, so we're very excited about it. However, this is a dude who caught nearly 70 balls, just over 1,000 yards as a rookie, but had a letdown the last couple of years. You look at Kyle Pitts from a season-long standpoint. Where did you guys end up on him with Establish the Run, knowing that the talent is there? Now maybe the quarterback and the situation is better for him this year as well.
Yeah, he was I thought I was muted. Sorry. He was a player we had a lot of debate about. I think there are pretty wide opinions even within our own like internal projections team and the people working on ranking him. I personally like him. Me, Mike Leone, and Mark Dankenbring did a main event draft, and we ended up taking him, I think, in the 3rd round, so pretty early. But I'm not super worried about the hamstring. When we first got the news of the hamstring, it was kind of like, especially with Kyle Pitts, it was kind of like, oh, here we go again with this guy. But I mean, Pitts himself tweeted out that he missed 2 plays in a practice on Wednesday, so I don't think it's too much of a concern. I think this new offense I think people are maybe underestimating just how big of a jump it's going to be from an Arthur Smith offense to this new Zach Robinson offense. So I'm in on Pitts. I'm in on London. I would take him at his current ADP.
When you look at the future production for Kyle Pitts this year, is it just because of Cousins and just because of the new OC, new offense? I mean, is that the reason why you're bullish on him, or is there something else I'm missing that has you believing that 2024 is going to be really good to Kyle Pitts?
It's definitely a lot of that, but it's also, I mean, he was the 4th overall pick. We saw his rookie season. There is evidence that over the past couple of seasons, he was not quite himself, battling some injuries throughout those 2 years. This is another injury, obviously, going into week 1, so you don't love to see that, but it doesn't seem like there's very much concern from Pitts or the Falcons about it. So I'm inclined to believe he's mostly healthy, and the hamstring is pretty much a minor issue. And I think that we've seen him be such a great talent, and I don't think you suddenly lose that. Like, he was such a highly touted prospect, played so well as a rookie. I think there must have been exterior factors working against him, whether it be the offensive coordinator, the injuries that he's dealt with. I think this is the first year that we're really going to see, since his rookie season, see Pitts get back to the player that he was coming into the league.
I'm very excited for that. I know with the FFPC tight end premium scoring, there's a lot of people that are very excited because they're sinking significant draft capital in order to get Kyle Pitts this year, for sure. I want to move on to a player who is in a brand new situation because he's no longer on the Chargers. He's on the Chicago Bears, and that's Keenan Allen. He was limited in practice yesterday, Jack. He was limited again today with a heel issue. This was the same injury that ended his season in 2023. Now he's joining a squad that not only features DJ Moore, but they invested the 9th overall pick into Rome Odunze too. Granted, Caleb Williams is his quarterback, but when you look at what Keenan Allen is going to do this year, we know he's been a baller for so long, but he's never had this much talent around him either. Keenan Allen, wide receiver 42, 803. Can you talk a little bit about what you think of him from a season-long perspective, as well as how much this heel injury might cause him to have maybe a down week 1 in his debut with the Bears.
Yeah, for week 1, we have not docked Keenan at all. That is mostly because we wait until Friday so we get the full picture, just because there's no point in moving back and forth. We might as well wait for the full picture before we start to apply the injury docs to most players. From a season-long perspective, I'm a little bit worried about I think he's going to be a very productive target earner early in the season, and I think there's a pretty good chance that he out-targets DJ Moore in week 1, but over the course of the season, I think Moore is just a better talent at this stage. It wouldn't surprise me if Rome Odunze shows himself to be a much more efficient player too. So I don't hate Allen at his price. I do think that he has the ability to rack up a bunch of targets, get a bunch of short catches. But at cost, even, I'm more interested in both DJ Moore and Odunze.
So, I'll just bring this up, and we'll talk more about this with Caleb Williams. But when you look at the three receivers, the three big receivers for Chicago right now, in Allen, I'll go in order of how they're being drafted right now. DJ Moore is the first receiver off the board, wide receiver 23, middle of the 4th round. Then you look at Odunze, who has now moved ahead of Keenan Allen at the middle of the 7th round. Middle of the 7th round. Keenan Allen has now fallen to the early 8th round, and you still so you're paying actually up. You're paying more draft capital to get more in Odunze. Allen to you is just not that much it's not enough of a discount for you to want to say, hey, this is my Bears receiver target. You want to go the other way.
Yeah, I'd rather take Odunze, especially in so many of these leagues, and especially in the season-long tournaments. Where the money is decided is so based on the end of the season, and I think Keenan Allen's going to pretty easily be ahead of Odunze to start the year, and I think that's the consensus opinion. But so much can happen over a 4-month season. Allen's getting up there in age, already has a heel injury, already declining efficiency on a per target basis. So I'd rather bet on the rookie breaking out over the second half of the year with Odunze.
And you'd rather bet on the younger DJ Moore as well, rather than Keenan Allen too.
Yeah.
Jaylen Warren, let's move on to him and talk Pittsburgh here. He was limited yesterday, gets in a full practice today, and it sounds like he is going to be active for the Arthur Smith revenge game against the Falcons. He is a player that is going to be sharing the backfield with Najee Harris. We obviously know this. We also know that Arthur Smith loves to give his running backs all they can handle. So even though he's in a committee, and you could throw in Cordero Patterson in there as well, that pie is going to be pretty big. The amount of touches that the Steelers running backs are going to get this year is going to be a lot bigger than many other NFL teams. Right now, Najee Harris is going in front of Jaylen Warren. 707 for Harris, Warren at the 812. Now, I just said I facilitated a 10K buy-in with some of the heaviest hitters at the FFPC, and Harris did fall behind Jaylen Warren. Warren was selected first, but only by 1 pick. Do you guys have a feeling at ETR about who the right Steelers running back is to own, or would you be fine with either one of these guys, especially if you're a volume drafter? I
kind of like both of them, and this is the first year I've really been in on Najee Harris, but I think with Arthur Smith, say what you want about him, he's obviously a huge mess for fantasy owners, but he does create efficient running offenses. So I think Najee Harris, this is going to be his most efficient rushing season so far, and I think we can expect them just to run the ball a ton. And then Warren, when he's healthy, there was a quote today where I think it was Arthur Smith that mentioned Cordero Patterson, so I think Patterson could be a little bit more involved than we'd like week 1. We'll see with Warren's hamstring injury recovery. But I think once Warren is healthy, he's going to be the primary pass catching back. Then you've got the contingent upside if something happens to Harris. And on the flip side, in the second preseason game for the Steelers, when Warren went down, it was Harris that filled in on third downs, not Patterson. So I think both of these guys have some interesting contingent value, and I don't mind either of them.
National contest, whether it's the main event or the Fantasy Pros Championship, or you want to increase variance, Cordero Patterson worth a 19th or 20th round pick for you?
I have not clicked on him yet. Yeah, I don't think I would do it.
So no, that's fine. Now, when it comes to winning a 12-team, like I know a lot of people who watch this are just in 12-team leagues, and that's fine. We have plenty of closed 12-team leagues at the FFPC. But if you are trying to beat thousands of other people, does Warren or Harris separate himself more in that format, or is the difference negligible regardless of the type of league you're playing in for the Steelers' backfield mates?
I don't think it's a huge difference. I think both guys have similar upside if something happens to the other one. I guess Warren is probably the player with more juice. So I think if anything, I would give him the lean. If you really need a smash week and you're talking about a guy who, if you give him a 20 touch per game workload, who scores more points, it's probably Jaylen Warren. But I think both of them have high upside if something happens to the other.
The Pittsburgh backfield is certainly one you want to get right for fantasy purposes this year. I think the Los Angeles Rams backfield is another one. And every time I think I have this thing figured out, Sean McVay throws another curve into it. We found out that Kyron Williams is going to be returning punts this year. And so obviously a lot of people, FFPC players, bumped up Blake Corum on their draft boards. Then we find out recently that Blake Corum might be returning kicks for the Rams too as well. So is this just a case of Sean McVay wanting to get his best players on the field as much as possible, even if it's on special teams? Or how do we handle these guys for fantasy purposes, knowing that they're going to be out there for special teams as well? It's tough to get a handle on how this backfield split's going to work. How have you guys that established the run worked with the Rams backfield this year?
Yeah, it seems like the Rams are pretty insistent that the only reason they're giving Kyron to punt returns is because they want to get him the ball as much as possible, and they want to get him the ball in situations that can help them win. It is a little bit scary, but I do think it's kind of balanced out by the fact that Corum's returning kicks. Kickoffs are more important this year, just with the dynamic kickoff. So it's like they want to get an actual playmaker out there and not just a body. So I guess you could even spin it as a positive if you want for Corum, but in general, we haven't really touched either of them based off of this. At first, we were pretty confused on what to do with Kyron when the news came out, but if you watch the McVay press conference, it didn't seem like as big of a deal as the initial tweet just saying like Kyron Williams returning punts. So we haven't made too many changes off that.
I want to go to the chat right now for the people tuning in and watching this and trying to get their lineup set for tonight. Number one, Adam Hahn, who's watching us on YouTube. Does Justin Fields start week one? We'll go to back to Pittsburgh. Wilson is still bothered by the calf. And to shed some light on this, Ian Rappaport, a little bit less than an hour ago, reported that Russell Wilson practiced in full on Wednesday, did not have any injury designation. Today, he's being listed as limited with a calf injury. Now, Mike Tomlin has already told us that Russell Wilson is the starter, but he also said Fields would be ready to go if Wilson can't go. Do you have a read on this right now, or are you sort of waiting to see what happens tomorrow in regards to the injury report from Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I don't really know here. I think Tomlin said that Wilson is going to get checked out by a doctor, but he also said that he has no concern. So I guess we'll see what he does tomorrow. We'll see if we get any reports. I think you still have to assume Wilson is starting, but who knows at this point, really.
One of the biggest risers, I would say, in the last week in the Fantasy Pros Championship, and he's had one of the most tumultuous off seasons, both off the field and in his ADP as well. It's just been a roller coaster for Rashee Rice. This is a guy that has moved up to the 401 on average in the Fantasy Pros Championship over the last day's worth of drafts. So you're looking at about 2-3 dozen drafts there. But Jack, I saw him go at the 2-3 turn several times today with the live drafts going on at Planet Hollywood with the FFPC. He continues to go up, and I think this is an interesting situation here that Firefighter 1526, who's watching us on Twitch, has. Do I start Rashee Rice tonight? He has CeeDee Lamb. He has Puka Nacua. He has DeAndre Swift in at flex. This is full PPR. Full PPR, I almost always lean towards the receivers here. So for me, I'd be more than willing to bench Swift and put Rice in here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with you for sure. I think it's definitely Rice over Swift for me there.
The Dallas Cowboys running back situation, Jers has a question about it. They have Ezekiel Elliott, but Rico Dowdle is out there. based on what I've heard this year, based on everything that's being reported, I'd rather have Dowdle than Elliott. And obviously, if you're playing in a short bench league, I think Elliott is more than expendable. Do you believe, and you guys that established a run, do the projections there dictate that Dowdle is the guy to own in Dallas?
Yeah, we have it with a pretty close split, so it's not like we don't really have an idea how this backfield is going to shake out.
Mm-hmm.
But Dowdle is the younger guy. All the reports indicate that he's the most explosive option right now. So in a vacuum, I do prefer Dowdle over Zeke.
I do too, and I kind of wish I would have had more Dowdle. As it's one of those things where it's been such a nebulous situation. It still is a nebulous situation where you just don't know what's going to happen. Those are the situations I like to have a decent amount of shares of, because if one of them hits, it could be big. The all-in-one show on YouTube has Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle as their wide receivers, number 1 and number 2 wide receivers. And then the flex is where there's some consternation here. You got T. Higgins, you got Zay Flowers tonight, or Drake London. So Zay Flowers taking on the Chiefs tonight, obviously in Kansas City. T. Higgins this week is at home against the New England Patriots, and we already talked about that Falcons game against the Steelers for London. Jack, I'll throw this to you first. I'll weigh in after you do. But your thoughts here on who to start at flex between Higgins, Flowers, and Drake London.
Yeah, it's not a perfect matchup, but I think I'd go London. We're projecting him for a pretty big target share. And this offense is just going to look so different. So I'd go London there. Yeah,
my concern with with the Cincinnati game is Higgins just doesn't get involved in the offense as much, especially if Cincinnati does get an early lead. I like the 2 running backs they have there. I think the offensive line is better too. So that could be a game where Higgins just ends up with like a 3 for 40 or something like that. Flowers too tonight. You have Mark Andrews, you have Derrick Henry, and obviously you want to keep Patrick Mahomes off the field. I question his role. Drake London, I think the offense flows through him and Bijan Robinson. So that's probably who I would say, like you said, this is not a smash spot for him, but it's a spot where I'd feel comfortable starting him over Higgins and Flowers. Kazi TX, Xavier Worthy, Joshua Palmer, Brian Robinson in the flex. This is PPR. Jack, I'll bring this up too. I've seen Joshua Palmer rise quite a bit in the FFPC drafts that we've had going on out here. In fact, I can tell you right now, in the Fantasy Pros Championship, he's ascended to the 1005. Both drafts I facilitated today, he went in the single-digit rounds. People are loving themselves some Joshua Palmer moving up. Still going behind McConkey, but he's definitely moving up in drafts right now. So when you look at Xavier Worthy against the Ravens tonight, without Hollywood Brown in the lineup for the Chiefs as well, Palmer, and then Brian Robinson, full PPR here. Do you have a thought? Do you have a feeling here, a lean that you would tell Kazi TX to go with?
Yeah, for me, Robinson is easily not in consideration against Worthy and Palmer. I think it's easily between the 2 receivers in PPR, and I'm going Worthy there. I think that Worthy's range of outcomes is much wider than Palmer. When we were projecting for week 1, it's really hard not to give Palmer a massive target share. But Worthy just has so much upside with Hollywood Brown out. Andy Reid did have that quote that is a little bit scary and is kind of the reason why I think he has a wider range of outcomes, saying that, we're going to see how he handles the work. But based on the preseason usage, he was in there a ton with Mahomes. I think he's going to be out there a lot tonight. So I'm going Worthy for the upside. If you're a massive favorite or something and you really can't avoid a 0 or something, maybe you could talk yourself into Palmer's floor. But Worthy's just the more exciting option for me.
Yeah, and one play could make his night. Can't say that about Joshua Palmer. You can't say that about Brian Robinson. So, and listen, it's the start of the season. Let's have some fun, right? Let's get the more explosive guy in there and make this game interesting. National television tonight, Xavier Worthy's first game as an NFL player. I'm with you. I played Worthy for sure. Now, this next one's a little bit more confusing. Adam Lovett, who's watching us on YouTube, Rashee Rice against the Ravens tonight. Does he start him over Deebo Samuel? Does he start him over Michael Pittman? A great trio of receivers here that we're dealing with. You're looking at Michael Pittman this weekend for the Colts playing against and I thought I had it in front of me once again, and I don't.
Texans.
Houston Texans, thank you, in Indy, yes. And then Deebo Samuel obviously taking on the New York Jets. Is that Sunday or Monday night that they play? That's Monday night.
That's Monday, yeah.
Monday night. Okay, so Samuel at home against the Jets. Boy, this is a tougher one, and I don't know which way I would lean on this, Jack. Do you have a thought? Because one of these things, like when you have 3 of these three great receivers like this, very often it's difficult to get the right one started. It's very difficult to pick the correct start. Do you have a feeling here?
Yeah, I mean, my first instinct is if you're benching two of those guys, you're probably in pretty good shape regardless.
Yes,
but
exactly.
God, I really don't know on this one. I think I would maybe. I think I'd go Rice or Pittman just because they have. I mean, the Jets' defense is tougher, but I'd probably go Pittman, I think.
Now this is tough too, because you know how involved Pittman is going to be, and we think how involved Rice is going to be in this offense too. And obviously, with Brandon Ayuk missing so much time, Deebo Samuel is probably going to be a huge part of the game plan as well. Deebo Samuel is another guy that I've seen climbing up draft boards out here as well. Third round pick all day from everything I've seen so far at Planet Hollywood. But when it comes down, I think I think the call for me here is Pittman. If you are only playing one, I think it's easy. If you're playing two, boy, I don't know between Samuel and Rice. I think I'd lean towards Rice, but ask me tomorrow morning. And I guess you can ask me tomorrow morning because Rice will have already played. So I guess I would rank them Pittman, Rice, Samuel. But like you said, it is oh so very close. Jack Miller from Establish the Run joining me on the show tonight. Jerry Jeudy practicing in full against the Dallas Cowboys this weekend. This year, the Browns offense is going to be interesting because this is kind of a put up or shut up year for Deshaun Watson, because not only is he healthy-ish coming into the season, but he's got David Njoku. He's got Amari Cooper. He already had Elijah Moore. They went out and they grabbed Jerry Jeudy. And then the backfield is Chubless, at least to start the season, where you have Jerome Ford, who's a pretty good pass catcher. You have Deonta Foreman, who's a pretty good pass catcher. Jeudy is the guy that's probably going to be opposite Amari Cooper on the majority of offensive snaps for Cleveland this year. How do you feel about Jerry Jeudy this season?
Yeah, I mean, it's do or die for Watson. You could say it's do or die for Jeudy too, with how much hype he's gotten throughout his career. He's a productive player, but I'd say relatively little production compared to how much people like him. In terms of Watson and this offense as a whole, I'm not super high on Watson. I don't think that he suddenly forgot how to play football, but it's a little concerning that his numbers are so much worse combined with the shoulder injury. So I think you could maybe piece together that the shoulder is a pretty big issue. They held him out of the preseason game against the Seahawks because of the shoulder, which is not exactly what you want to hear 2 weeks before the season. I do think Judy's going to be out there a ton, though. So from a target perspective, I don't mind it. And Ken Dorsey, they hired him after he was let go by Buffalo last year. He was let go by Buffalo because they wanted to run the ball more. When they got Joe Brady, they became one of the run-heavier teams in the league. Under Dorsey, they were pretty pass-heavy. So I think that is a big indication that they are not going to be the same Browns we're used to, with Nick Chubb on the mend for – I think Nick Chubb's going to be out maybe more than the 4 weeks that he has to be out. Mm-hmm. And with Watson being such a big investment, with Chubb out, with Dorsey in, I think that's a signal that they're going to want to pass the ball. I don't think they're going to be super efficient with Watson. I do think Jeudy is going to play a ton. I'm not a huge Jeudy fan, but I mean, he should get targets. Is pretty much where I'm at. I haven't drafted him a ton, but he's semi-viable.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of with you. I don't hate him where he is, but I always just found somebody I like better than Jeudy. And obviously the unknown of that Browns offense makes it both palatable and unpalatable, depending upon your risk level, risk assessment for that situation as well, and how you want to build your fantasy football team. I am getting some breaking news, semi-breaking here, not only from the YouTube chat, but Adam Hahn said that it's pouring rain in Kansas City right now. And some of the texts I've gotten, and one from a high-volume FFPC player, he says there's been some lightning there, and he's guessing that the game might get delayed. I don't know. That's just speculation on his part. Just guessing at this point. But When you look at the weather situation, does that change the way now that how you feel about Xavier Worthy, how you feel about Rashee Rice? Is it actually better for these guys if they're playing in slop? If the field is wet, how do you feel about Rice and Worthy if it is a rainy night at Arrowhead?
Yeah, I think if it's mild rain, it doesn't have too much of an effect. To my knowledge, wind is a significantly bigger variable than rain. So if it's just mild rain, I don't think it's a huge issue. If they delay it, I mean, we could get to a point where they put a tarp on the field and it starts raining and they don't play the game on time. And then by the time they do play the game, weather's not a concern anymore. So it could end up being just a big nothing
non-issue,
if they delay it. I guess it's a slight downgrade, assuming it's pretty like normal rain and not a torrential downpour. But unless you're like deadlocked even between two guys, I would not let it have too much of an impact. And maybe it is like heavy downpour right now. I don't really know. I saw similar stuff that it's raining and there's scattered thunderstorms, but I don't know the full extent of it.
I'm seeing on X right now that fans are leaving their seats. It's unclear if they're being told to leave their seats. The players have gone back inside of the locker rooms, and we don't know if there's going to be a delay. However, I haven't heard that being talked about yet. We are about an hour away from kickoff, roughly, the scheduled kickoff, and we'll keep you abreast of everything going on there as we'll be following this situation going forward. Curtis Samuel is not playing against the Chiefs tonight. He will be playing for the Bills week 1 of the season. Curtis Samuel is a player that there has been a lot of love for over the course of his NFL career, but he's always had trouble staying healthy. And once again, he has a toe issue. He's practicing in full this week. I guess I would be a little bit nervous about playing him week 1, especially where you get him in drafts. You probably have some better options, both at flex and wide receiver there. But your thoughts on this toe injury maybe lingering throughout the season, Jack? You talk about the Bills receivers in general, too. Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir. Everybody has their favorites, right? It's like Starburst. You know, I like the red ones best. Or I like the pink ones best. I like the orange ones best. Which Bills receiver do you like best this year?
I mean, I like Kincaid the best. If I had to pick a later one, I think it would be Coleman. I do think he's going to start pretty slow. I think it's going to be. I think he'll be out there a ton. I think him and Matt Collins are going to be the outside guys with Samuel and Shakir. Maybe not playing as many snaps as we would like, but I just think down the stretch, Keon Coleman has so much more upside than either Samuel or Shakir. So I'm willing to accept what I think is a lower floor with him. He could just not do a whole lot the whole year. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a worthwhile gamble to take for the possibility of him reaching that ceiling over the second half of the year. I'm not super worried about Samuel, though, from an injury perspective. He's fully practicing ahead of week 1. The reports I think have generally been good. So I'm not too panicky on Samuel.
Another question here, John H. This will be an easy one for me. Would you drop Samaje Perine for Justin Fields? He's in a 1-start quarterback league. He does not have a backup quarterback, 18-round, 12-teamer, and his starter is Jordan Love. I'm not dropping Samaje Perine in favor of a quarterback who may or may not be the starter at all this season for his team. Keep Perine on your roster. This is a player that I spent a lot of money in my fab in my leagues this past week. To make sure I got on my roster. I didn't realize, Jack, how many passes he caught last year. And granted, I was talking with another really high volume FFPC player, and I was asking him about Perine. He's like, well, bear in mind, he couldn't make the Broncos. And, so let's not fall all over ourselves yet. But, and I was saying this too tonight. I mean, if Perine is out there on a lot of third downs and Pacheco's not, it's going to radically change their draft stock. Perine's going to go up. Pacheco's going to go down. What are your expectations for Samaje Perine in a Chiefs uniform this year?
Yeah, I'm curious how they're going to use him this week. I mean, he just signed there, and Patrick Mahomes is the most valuable player in the league. So I think if they put him out there on third downs this week, that's a pretty massive vote of confidence. If he's been on the team for less than 2 weeks and they already trust him to protect Patrick Mahomes on third down, but I definitely agree with you. I'm definitely not dropping Perine for Fields. If Pacheco were to go down, I assume it would be a split between Perine and once Clyde is back, if he comes back this year, Clyde, and if not, Carson Steele probably gets involved a little bit. But we've seen McKinnon have massive weeks on not that many touches. So if Pacheco gets hurt and Pirine can get the high value touches, the third downs, the red zone work, he can have a pretty massive fantasy ceiling.
Who among us has not been McKinnon before,
right,
both
exactly.
positively or negatively in fantasy?
Exactly. Yeah. And that seems like the role that he's coming in to fill. So yeah, I'm definitely not dropping Pirine for Fields.
Speaking of backfields, I want to talk about New York's just real quick. New York Giants, excuse me. Tyrone Tracy is not listed on the injury report. This is a guy who had an air cast fitted on his leg when he got hurt in training camp earlier. I did not get a whole lot of Tyrone Tracy in my rookie dynasty drafts. I have not been drafting him a ton this year, only because I'm skeptical that if Devin Singletary were to go down, that it would be Tyrone Tracy's backfield. This is a guy who is not that far removed from being a receiver. I don't necessarily know if he has the body to go between the tackles, and I envision a split between him and Eric Gray in New York if Singletary were to miss time. Am I missing something here? Does Tyrone Tracy have standalone value maybe in that backfield? How do you weigh in on Tyrone Tracy this year, Jack?
I'm pretty much with you there. I mean, a split backfield, if Singletary goes down between Tracy and Gray on a bad New York offense, is not exactly an option I'm super interested in for fantasy. And it seems like the coaches love Singletary. I forget who it was today, but someone had a quote that Singletary could play 80+% of snaps. I mean, wherever Singletary goes, it seems like coaches love him. I mean, he beat out Dameon Pierce last year. He was a mainstay in Buffalo for so long. It seems like Devin Singletary is just consistently a coach's favorite, and it seems like that has happened again with the Giants. So I think week 1, Singletary is going to play as much as he can handle. I think Tracy becomes where he could become involved is that despite being a huge coach's favorite throughout his career, according to Pro Football Focus, Singletary is also consistently graded out as a below average receiver. Tracy was a college wide receiver for a while. But even then, I mean, you're talking about a guy who his standalone values being the pass catching back for the Giants, and his upside is splitting the backfield with Eric Gray if something happens to Singletary. So I have drafted Tracy a couple of times, but he's not someone I'm targeting by any means in every draft I've done.
We're going to keep following this weather situation with Kansas City and Baltimore tonight. But when we do come back from this quick break, Jack Miller is going to dish on some of his favorite bets, his favorite props, both week 1 and season long. You don't want to miss that. This is his milieu. This is his expertise. So, and especially for anybody who's watching this out in Las Vegas right now or in a place where you can make bets, you certainly want to get in on this segment for sure. He's Jack Miller from Establish a Run. I'm Eric Balkman from the Fantasy Football Players Championship. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
Football. This month, more men and women will go draft than ever before in our country's history. With prize pools at record highs, multiple fantasy players will become millionaires this year playing the game they love. This month, thousands of drafters will compete in redraft, best ball and dynasty leagues, and with innovative formats, they can look forward to a host of high-stakes competition. It's August again in fantasy football, and under the FFPC, high-stakes fantasy is bigger and better than ever before. Why would you ever settle for less?
Flair once said, if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And if you want to be the man or woman this fantasy football season, you got to play over at myffpc.com. That's where all the best fantasy gamers play. That's where all the high stakes gamers play because they've got the high stakes leagues. They have the best formats. They have the best payouts. It's the place to be. And if you win a FFPC main event or a Fantasy Pros Championship contest over there, you put some serious respect on your name and some money in your pocket. Anyone can win their hometown league, right? You're probably a great fantasy gamer. Prove it. You go out and win an event like this, you can go and put in your Twitter bio or X bio, FFPC main event champion. That means something. That's definitive proof that you're one of the best fantasy gamers in the world. So go over to myffpc.com and use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. And now you're on your road to greatness, right? You could even do an online draft, or you can go and draft in Las Vegas with the stars. Draft at Planet Hollywood for the FFPC main event. That's where they're all doing it. It's awesome stuff. So get set up now so that you can be a star this year. You can be the man. Just like Ric Flair, you can be a champion. Woo!
Welcome back to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman at Eric Balkman on X. He's at Jack Miller02 on X. You see his work at establishthерun.com. Want to remind everybody, too, that time is running out to play in the Fantasy Pros Championship. MyFFPC.com is where to go. $350 to enter. You'll get a $50 discount on every third team. You get a $1 million grand prize. And contest may not sell out, too. So there could be some good action, some good ROI there. If you want to check that out at myffpc.com. Jack, we had a question from our good buddy Permar99 watching us on YouTube tonight. Would you drop Tank Bigsby for the next Puka Nacua, Jalen McMillan? I guess this is kind of dependent upon how you structure your team, right? If you're in a closed 12-team league and you have both Bigsby and ETN, I probably would hang on to Bigsby. If you are in a situation where you're loaded at receiver, I'd probably hang on to Bigsby, and especially if I'm in the national contest to increase my variance of my team of what it could be in the money weeks at the end. However, if I do need a receiver, or you're in a dynasty league and you're trying to figure out, what to use one of your last few players on, which young player to go with, man, I really like Jalen McMillan. I like the fact that Evans and Godwin, one of those guys is probably not in Tampa Bay next year. And Jalen McMillan could be a starter there. I will not go as far to say he's going to have a Puka Nacua-esque season this year, but it kind of depends. But your thoughts on Bigsby versus McMillan here?
Yeah, I was going to bring up exactly what you said, that it really comes down to team construction for me. If I went with a zero or a hero RB approach, I'm probably hanging on to Tank. But otherwise, in a vacuum, if all else were held equal, I think I prefer McMillan. He's someone I've tried to draft a lot of. The reports out of camp have been amazing. He's been one of the stars of camp league-wide, just based on the reporting. And if something were to happen to either Evans or Godwin, you've really got two cracks at that contingent value and stepping into the wide receiver 2 role. So if all else were equal, I would prefer McMillan, but it does come down to who else you have on your team for me.
The better boss, our producer Matt Deutsch, tonight just said that because of the rain, he parlayed Derrick Henry over 120 rushing yards, Patrick Mahomes more than 25 rushing yards, and Isaiah Pacheco to hit at least 70 rushing yards at plus 7,500 tonight. How do you feel about that wager, Jack?
I mean, it's 75-1. It could happen. I don't have, a strong opinion here, really. But there's probably worse bets to make.
Let's talk about some of the better bets that we should be looking at this weekend. I'm going to kind of let you take this how you want to do it. We can focus on week 1. We can focus on season-long props, whatever you want to do, because this is your expertise. Before we start, I want you to share with the listeners sort of how you got into this and what area you find yourself, because betting there's so many different ways that we can do it now. And I think that there might be certain areas where you feel you're maybe stronger than others. So just give your background a little bit real quick on what you like to do as far as betting goes.
Yeah, so I started with betting a few years ago when I was at RotoViz at the time, and Court Smith, who founded Bet the Prop, now actually works at ETR. He DM'd me and he said, "Hey, we need someone to write they would post a pick for a Sunday Night Football game. We need someone to write that up." Said, "Sure, I'll do it." Learned a ton about betting from Court and John Lipinski and a bunch of guys over at Bet the Prop, and kind of just got more into it. Started reading books. I think you can learn a lot on Twitter too. Now I pretty much bet on a bunch of different things. I mean, I bet on super niche stuff like the WNBA first half, WNBA props. I've bet on the Little League World Series before.
Wow.
So I mean, there's edges everywhere if you know where to find them. But for ETR, I do the NFL props and help on the NFL service.
Has it changed, over the course of the last year or two or whatever? Is it tougher to find edges now? Is it tougher to find that information? Because I would imagine that with just the explosion of information that we can get on the internet, if we know where to look for it, we're kind of all in the same playing field. I would imagine it's tougher to find edges. Do you find that's the case too?
Oh, it definitely is. We had an article, actually, this happened yesterday, where we were just looking through the ETR menu and the articles that we have listed, like the quote unquote evergreen stuff. And I had written an article in 2021, or maybe 2022, but a couple of years ago, basically, using data from the previous season. And it was how to bet position props. Like, it was how to bet quarterback. There are 4 articles: how to bet quarterback, how to bet running back, etc. And at that time, especially for running back, wide receiver, and tight end, all of the data showed that you could basically hit 55 to 60% if you bet every single under on the board without a second thought at close, like right before the game started, which is when you can get the most down, when you're able to bet the most money. And nowadays, that's definitely no longer the case. Now it's pretty close to 50-50. As of last year, I think there was still a very slight unders lean, but definitely not enough to beat the juice. Whereas a couple years ago, you could have made a bunch of money just simply betting every single under. You would have beat the juice, and you would have beat it by a lot. You probably could have had a high single-digit ROI, which is very strong.
Yeah, that's awesome, for sure. So where are we starting tonight, Jack? Where would you like to take us as far as and by the way, we can always read more of your work on this at establishtheRun.com, but give us a taste of what we can expect when we go there and we're looking for some action.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of articles on ETR that I think that's my favorite part of it, is like the more evergreen content. It's hard to do evergreen stuff in betting because stuff changes. But in terms of a week 1 bet, we bet earlier for ETR. We talked about him earlier. Devin Singletary over 13.5 attempts. I think as of an hour or two ago, you could still get yards over 51.5, which we have as also good value. It just relates to the fact that we expect them to be pretty much a workhorse. And I mean, it also kind of relates to, like, 2 years ago, there was no reason to ever bet an over. Now we've bet 9 or 10 props for the week, and I think 6 or 7 of them are overs. But yeah, Singletary over is one that we already bet. I think we moved the line so you can't get the exact 13.5 carries, but yardage is a similar bet. Hopefully he can find the efficiency to get to 52 yards.
Do you feel like this is a purely matchup play, or are you guys at ETR pretty bullish on Devin Singletary in general? From a season-long perspective, I should say.
Season-long, we're not overly bullish on him.
Okay.
Just being, he's realistically probably nothing exceptionally talented as a player, but it does seem like they're just going to give him the ball a ton early in the year. In the only preseason game that he played with Daniel Jones, he played 29 of 33 snaps with Jones in the first half. That's just a pretty ridiculous workload for a running back. So I think week 1, he should be out there a ton and get a ton of work.
Lexton R16 on Twitch, rate my wide receiver trio out of 10. I'm on Ross St. Brown, Marvin Harrison, Drake London. Yeah, it's a 10. I don't know what the rest of your team looks like, but that's pretty good. Be proud of yourself there. In regards to betting and props, and I think, like, with legalization going on in so many states over the last half decade, Jack, it's been an explosion. And obviously we are interested. Like, this is something the American public is definitely interested in. For somebody who would call themselves a novice bettor, or somebody who's just trying to get into prop betting, what are some of the pitfalls to avoid? What are some of the things that you see, for lack of a better term, rookie bettors making that they need to avoid to make themselves sharper over the course of their betting career?
Yeah, I think the big one would just be a lack of respect for the market. Like, take the game for tonight, for example, the Chiefs Ravens game. It's been between 2.5 and 3, the spread. There's a prominent offshore sports book where you can bet to win $100,000 with one click. And then 2 seconds later, they'll move the line. 2 seconds later, you can bet another to win $100,000. So obviously, like, there's probably a handful of people in the world doing it, and no one that I know or is even close to that realm. But it just goes to show that, like, the sharpest bettors, and the public is not moving a line. Only the line is basically based on where the sharp bettors determine it should be. And if the sharp bettors are not taking $100,000 a click and moving the line, it's a pretty good indication that the line is pretty good.
So you mentioned the Singletary one. What are some of the other ones that you're looking at? And you want to expand it to season long? That's cool too. I'd be very interested in hearing what else you would suggest for a lot of people who are going to be out in Las Vegas, or who are out in Las Vegas right now for FFPC, who want to place these season long wagers. Is there anything that you're looking at?
Season long, I would have to think. There's nothing off the top of my head. I don't think at ETR we've played a season long play in a couple weeks. I do think we showed some Bowers unders, if I'm remembering correctly. If you can get like under 650 yards for the season, it's just a completely different market than fantasy, because in fantasy we care so much about range of outcomes. In terms of betting, we only care about a median outcome, and tight end is a high injury rate position. Bowers has upside to be a top 2 or 3, if not top 1 option at the position. So in fantasy, that's interesting. But for betting, we don't care if he has 1,100 yards or if he has 651 yards. The loss counts the same way. Mm-hmm. And if he gets hurt, that's pretty much just a win. And I think that the median for a rookie tight end, even one who is so super talented as Bowers, is lower than 650.
Bowers, from a fantasy perspective, you guys at ETR, when you put together your projections, did you find yourself kind of scratching your heads like, how do we rate this guy? Because you know what a talent he was coming in out of college, but you also know the situation he's coming into. You know that Devontae Adams is still there as well. How difficult was it to get a handle on what you think Bowers is going to do in 2024?
It's definitely tough. What we do at ETR for season-long projections is we will project a base target share, and then we have different algorithms that will take his base target share and spit out like catches and yards and touchdowns. And then we also have a ceiling projection. So it's not just one number or a few numbers. We're projecting really 2 different things, like his median expectation, as well as if things break right, what is the 90th percentile outcome for Brock Bowers. And so with that bet that I just said was probably good if it still exists, on base target share, we have it as very good. But from a fantasy perspective, we know that he's one of the best tight end talents to come out of the league this century. So we have his ceiling just juiced a ton, as much as really any tight end.
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit surprised that he wasn't going higher, especially out in Las Vegas. Right, I'll bring this up right now. As far as the Fantasy Pros Championship goes right now, Brock Bowers is an ADP of tight end 10 at the 606, which I know sounds aggressive, but when you consider a tight end premium format and that this guy was, one of the best prospects, tight end prospect coming into the NFL in quite a while, it's very exciting to get a guy like that in your team. And yet 9 tight ends are still going off the board in front of him. Now, maybe that changes this weekend, maybe not. But if you're trying to beat 1,000+ teams in the FFPC main event, you definitely want to take a look at Brock Bowers, especially waiting on a tight end. One of the things, and I think I've said this on the show before, Jack, one of the things that I keep hearing from high-stakes players is draft Bowers now, because he will never be this cheap in drafts again. Like, this is the time to get him. Getting back to betting briefly, Bill Hollywood says he said that he's been limited on a lot of gambling sites, and if he wins, that they limit him, or they email you and they say they don't want his action. He wants to know if this has ever happened to you, Jack, on any sites out there. Yeah,
it's very common, especially as you get into betting smaller stuff. Like I mentioned, the WNBA stuff, that's a pretty good way to get limited. That's just kind of the nature of the game. If those limits did not exist, then you would see sports books like Circa, which don't limit, but also have a pretty tiny offering. So there's a handful of props you can bet on Circa each week, a handful of sports that you can bet on Circa. So it's very good for high limits, but that's just kind of the price you're paying for props. And then from there, It's just kind of on you to either get sportsbook accounts or, team up with people. Betting partnerships are very common. Same game parlays are generally a good way to avoid limits because they're such overwhelmingly bad action for the vast majority of people that if you can find an edge on them, which is possible, then you'll fly under the radar for longer. A lot of the game is just making yourself and your account look like you don't know what you're doing while you do.
Right, exactly. That's the secret to life, really. When you think about it, make it look like you don't know what you're doing when in fact you are in complete control. You know what's going on. Last thing I want to mention before we take a quick break. What are you producing as far as content wise specifically? Do you have a schedule that you're doing at ETR this season in regards to betting and props content?
Props content? No, it'll just be the service that we have. Mm-hmm. I have an article coming out on Monday, or actually I write it on Monday. It comes out on Tuesday morning. Just going over all the usage. So I think that if you are betting props, it should be pretty valuable for you to just see every single thing that myself and the other people at the ETR team think is important usage wise. So that should be helpful. But as far as content goes, nothing on betting during the season.
EstablishTheRun.com is where to go, at JackMiller02 for more. And we will have more with Jack Miller when we come back. In fact, we got breaking news on the start of the Chiefs and Ravens tonight. We'll tell you what that is, how it affects tonight, the rest of tonight's show, and what you're doing as far as your fantasy lineups go. He's Jack Miller from Established to Run. Eric Balkman here on the FFPC. You're watching the Better Sports Network.
Inflation is bad. When FFPC entered the high-stakes fantasy football arena in 2008, the grand prize of the FFPC main event was $75,000. Today, after 15-plus years of setting the industry standard, the FFPC main event has a $1 million grand prize. Since 2021, the FFPC Best Ball Tournament grand prize has tripled, and the Superflex Best Ball Tournament is now the largest contest of its kind in the world.
Flair once said, if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And if you want to be the man or woman this fantasy football season, you got to play over at myffpc.com. That's where all the best fantasy gamers play. That's where all the high stakes gamers play because they've got the high stakes leagues. They have the best formats. They have the best payouts. It's the place to be. And if you win a FFPC main event or a Fantasy Pros Championship contest over there, you put some serious respect on your name and some money in your pocket. Anyone can win their hometown league, right? You're probably a great fantasy gamer. Prove it. You go out and win an event like this, you can go and put in your Twitter bio or X bio, FFPC main event champion. That means something. That's definitive proof that you're one of the best fantasy gamers in the world. So go over to myffpc.com and use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. And now you're on your road to greatness, right? You could even do an online draft, or you can go and draft in Las Vegas with the stars. Draft at Planet Hollywood for the FFPC main event. That's where they're all doing it. It's awesome stuff. So get set up now so that you can be a star this year. You can be the man. Just like Ric Flair, you can be a champion. Woo!
MyFFPC.com is where to go to play the Fantasy Pros Championship and the FFPC main event. $1 million grand prizes in each of those contests, and time is running out to draft them. We'll have drafts going on after the game tonight, all day tomorrow, and all day Saturday as well. MyFFPC.com. Will you be the next FFPC millionaire? Find out when you register at myffpc.com today. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Scan that QR code if you're looking to play in the FFPC. I know it's like we've already gotten to the point where it's like we got to worry about fab and we got to worry about waiver wire and lineups. There's still time to draft. Squeeze a few more drafts in. You never know. One of these could be the big one. Jack Miller from EstablishTheRun.com joining me tonight on the HSFF show here on BSN. Al Paul in the YouTube chat, pretending to look like you don't know what you're doing and actually not knowing what you're doing is my biggest fear in life. Yeah, I've had situations where I was been like that as well, for sure. And then Maiden Focus on YouTube had the chance to double tap Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid the other night. Went Nabers in the third round over Dalton Kincaid. Hope it works out. Mainly worried about Daniel Jones, which I think is fair. Jack, I know you drafted in the main event this year. When you draft in tight end premium formats, do you ever like to go with a tight end start? I mean, I've seen it work out before, but it's usually not for the faint of heart. It's a little bit different. Now with the FFPC, you could start 3 tight ends every week with the dual flex. How do you feel about doubling up on tight end right away and getting some of these high target players at the position?
Yeah, I personally don't love spending that much draft capital on with 2 of your first 3 picks. In the main event we did with some of the ETR projections team, we were going to draft. I actually forget everyone that was on our team, but we were planning to take a mid-round tight end if we didn't like any of the receivers available. So like if we could get one of the Njoku, Bowers, Goddard, we were going to be good with that and good with starting them, even though we'd already taken Pitts. But in terms of picking Laporta and Kincaid, I would have taken Nabers there as well.
And Nabers is another guy that, like, in one of my other shows, we always have this thing called the hype guy. So basically a couple weeks ago, it's my final Friday night show of the season, or the preseason, I should say. And we always try to figure out who the hype guy is, who's going to be the guy that rises up draft boards the most when we get to Planet Hollywood in Las Vegas, where we're at right now for the FFPC main event. And we selected Malik Nabers this year as the hype guy, because this is a player that everybody's super excited about. Everybody knows the talent. He would have been the number 1 receiver drafted this year in the NFL draft had it been for Marvin Harrison. So when you consider a guy like Nabers and the situation he is in, are we right to hype this guy up, or is he not going to live up to it this year, Jack?
I think we're right too. I mean, I'm kind of all aboard the Nabers train. It seems like he's going to get just absolutely absurd usage. Sometimes you see some of these teams slow roll their rookies or make them earn their spot. The Giants seem 100% committed to Malik Nabers as our wide receiver 1. We're going to feed him the ball as much as possible. I mean, they unretired the number 1 for him, which is a pretty insane move. Dable had a quote today about how he has sections of his play sheet to or it might have been Nabers. It might have been a quote from Nabers about Dable. But regardless, Dable has a section of his play calling sheet where he has specific plays that will get certain guys the ball. And Dable and Nabers have apparently been talking about plays where they can get Nabers the ball. So I think he's going to get absolutely force fed. I'm aboard the train.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of skittishness only because he's a rookie, right? I mean, we have seen players with subpar quarterback play and substandard offenses have really big seasons if they have the talent. And it's clear to me that Malik Nabers has the talent as well. I said I don't want to do an empty tease. I said we had breaking news. Ian Rappaport from the NFL Network has stated that the kickoff between the Ravens and Chiefs tonight at Arrowhead in Kansas City will be delayed 20 minutes. It is now an 8:40 p.m. kickoff. And as that situation evolves, we'll keep you abreast of it right here on the HSFF show on the Better Sports Network. But right now it is a 20-minute delay due to lightning, rain, and weather. That is what we're looking at right now with tonight's game. Okay, let's get into one of my favorite segments of the offseason, and it's basically the last week we can do it because there's no fantasy football season-long drafts for the FFPC after this weekend. Jack, this is a segment called Who Would You Rather Draft? Would you rather draft, I should say. And these are all players, unless I say otherwise, that are going very, very close to each other in the FFPC drafts right now. I want to kick things off with wide receiver conversation. We've been talking about Michael Pittman a lot tonight, mostly from a week 1 standpoint, but what about a season-long perspective? Terry McLaurin is going as wide receiver 27 at the 506. Michael Pittman, 502 at wide receiver 24. 2 different types of receivers in different types of offenses this year. Who would you rather draft, McLaurin or Pittman?
I'm going Pittman there. I think he's going to get force-fed volume. The Shane Steichen has talked a little bit about using the short passing game and the RPO game as an extension of the run game or replacement for the run game. So I think Pittman's going to get just a ton of short targets and rack up the catches.
And one thing I should mention too, just because you're picking Pittman here, doesn't mean you're not bullish on McLaurin this year, right? I mean, I look at Jaden Daniels and that Commanders offense. It gets me very excited for drafting McLaurin this year too.
For sure, yeah. I mean, both of these guys are good, starting easy starters on all fantasy teams. So nothing against Terry.
Two wide receivers here that were not with their teams last year that they are this year, Calvin Ridley and Xavier Worthy. Ridley right now, wide receiver 33 at the 608. Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 34, also at the 608, smack dab next to each other. Ridley moves from Jacksonville to Tennessee. Xavier Worthy comes from the Longhorns in Texas to play for the Kansas City Chiefs this year. There's some similarities in their games, but there's some differences too. And obviously with the offenses this year, I think we need to unpack the Tennessee offense and what they're trying to do. But we'll kick it off with our launching pad in this conversation. Ridley or Worthy, who are you more likely to draft?
Yeah, I very slightly lean Worthy. I think if you asked me yesterday, it would have been Worthy by not a big margin, but more of an easy choice. But there was some stuff today about how Hopkins has an MCL tear, and if things don't go well, he could get surgery at some point. So miss a lot of time, which I mean would obviously be great news for Ridley and what should be a pass happy offense, but. I mean, Worthy's upside, like the fastest player in combine history who actually was a good college player too, not just some guy who can run fast in a Patrick Mahomes offense is really hard to pass up for me.
The Titans move on from Mike Vrabel, hire Brian Callahan from the Cincinnati Bengals as their head coach, who was the OC for Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and that electric offense there. They bring in Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, two pass-catching running backs to replace the bulldozer that was Derrick Henry in the backfield. They give Calvin Ridley a ton of money when they didn't have to, but they decided to pay him. This is all after soaking a first-round pick into Treylon Burks and having DeAndre Hopkins on this team, as well as Will Levis taking over a quarterback. I say this every week on this show. Matt Deutsch, our producer, will back me up on this. Everything the Titans have done this offseason has said, we want to throw the ball, we're going to throw the ball. However, it's one thing to say that and want to do it, and it's another thing to do it successfully and move the ball down the field and pile up yardage and points. Is Tennessee going to be able to execute the plan of putting up big numbers via the pass this season, in your opinion, Jack?
I think it comes down to Levis. I do think they're going to pass the ball a ton. Like, I fully believe that they are going to go from one of the run heavier teams in the league to one of the pass heaviest. Mm-hmm. Levis, I really don't have a strong opinion on. I think there's a wide range of outcomes there. So I'd say I'm pretty on market in terms of my Levis opinion. But I do think that they're going to pass the ball a ton.
I know that they want to, and I know that they're going to try to. What concerns me, and maybe I don't know, maybe you can key me into this, and maybe that my train of thought is incorrect here. But I think about a team that wants to pass the ball without necessarily a really strong running game. It can be bad. You can have a lot of 3-and-outs. It can tire your defense out. You could be playing from behind a lot this season. And maybe that happens with Tennessee. Maybe it doesn't. Do you feel like those teams, like we always say, the bad teams are always passing at the end because of all this garbage time? Is that a real thing? I mean, do we see when we think about this in our minds, like, oh, all the yardage and touchdowns get piled up in the second half when these teams are getting destroyed? Is that a real tangible thing, or is that something that we just think happens, but it actually doesn't?
I think it exists, but maybe not to the extent that some people.
To the degree,
yeah. But I mean, Brian Callahan with Cincinnati, not just in terms of raw pass rate, but pass rate over expectation. They were consistently top 3 pass heaviest teams in the league, and all their moves indicate they're gonna be. So I think I think that there's a chance the Titans are kind of decent this year. But I do think even in neutral game script, they're gonna be throwing.
Permar99 on YouTube right now. Will Levis is this year's Sam Howell. I could definitely see that for sure. Where team's not very good, but he piles up a ton of yardage, and that could work out for Will Levis owners and Tennessee Titans pass catchers as well. Speaking of pass catchers, let's go over to the NFC for a couple of wide receivers on some pretty good teams this year. Jaden Reed for Green Bay was their leading receiver last year as a rookie. Jackson Smith-Njigba was the top receiver drafted in the 2023 NFL draft, and he could take a big step forward this year. Maybe pass Tyler Lockett and maybe give DK Metcalf a run for his money as far as receptions go this year at least. These players are going fairly close to each other in drafts right now. Smith-Njigba, wide receiver 37 at the 707. Jaden Reed, wide receiver 38 at the 708. So you're not going to be able to get both these guys in most drafts unless you overdraft one of them, Jack. Who would you rather draft, Jackson Smith-Njigba or Jaden Reed?
Yeah, this is another one where I don't really feel strongly, and I like both players. I think I take Reed, though. He showed more as a rookie. I like JSN, too, and I think he could have a breakout year. But just going off of what we've seen, I would lean Reed in the better offense.
Let me ask you this. Let me frame it this way. I do believe Green Bay is the better offense, but I think Seattle's going to surprise this year with how good that offense is. The other thing I'll bring up with Reed, Christian Watson missed a lot of time last year with his hamstring issues, and it's been well reported about his trip to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they found out that one of his hamstrings was 20% stronger than the other, and it was throwing his lower body out of whack, and that's why he was having these soft tissue injuries. Apparently, he's gotten a handle on it, and apparently from July on, he's been on a special program to ensure that these things don't happen again. Well, he missed a lot of time last year, and Jaden Reed took advantage of that. If Watson truly is healed, and if he does play a normal amount of time this year, would that cause Reed to not put up the numbers he did this year? Or would Reed have put up better numbers had he already had a year of experience under his belt, which he does right now? So regardless of Watson being healthy or not, maybe Reed just takes a step forward here. There's a lot to unpack with this Green Bay situation, and I'll throw another monkey wrench into it. There's a lot of talented pass catchers, besides those two. Wicks and Dobbs and Musgrave, Jacobs out of the backfield, Marshawn Lloyd if he can get healthy. And I feel like Jordan Love is a talented enough quarterback, and I think Matt LaFleur is a talented enough game planner where they're going to scheme some things open, and Love is going to be able to hit the open guy. But the open guy could be any one of like 6 or 7 guys. And for me, it's tougher to know who to start on a week-to-week basis. Maybe Reed's the better play in best ball, but, man, I think Smith-Njigba in a managed league, he may not have the ceiling of Reed, but I think I like his floor a little bit better. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, I don't really think that you can go wrong with either of these guys.
Both they're both going to have great years, is what you're saying.
I definitely agree with you that I think if you look at the Packers' snap count in like 4 days, it's going to be kind of alarming. I think that they're going to rotate all 4 of Watson, Dobbs, Reed, and Dontavian Wicks, and then Bo Melton probably plays a non-zero amount too. But Reed played well. He was a good college player. I think that there's a lot of room for him to force his way into a bigger role. And then also, I mean, we're talking about a 4 wide receiver rotation. If any of them get hurt, all of a sudden that's 3 receivers that are on the field for a ton of snaps. So I just think that we've seen Reed do it at the NFL level. So I lean Reed.
As long as we're talking Packers here, Maiden Focus watching us on YouTube. Any thoughts on Tucker Kraft? Sounds like he might be the larger half of a platoon and should see steady playing time if healthy. I will say regarding the tight end situation for Green Bay, bear in mind that Musgrave has the draft capital over him. And I know it's only a round, but Musgrave was a 2nd-round pick. Kraft was a 3rd-round pick. Kraft was on his best games were when Musgrave was out last year. And Musgrave had a couple of weird injuries. One was a concussion. Not that that's a weird injury, but wasn't a soft tissue thing. And then the other one was a lacerated kidney where he missed a lot of time. Like I don't think that you're more prone once you lacerate your kidney once you're more prone to it. I don't think he's going to be the larger half of a platoon. I think that Musgrave is the more dynamic player. And I think if the Packers had their druthers, Musgrave would be out in the field more. I think the only thing Kraft does better right now is blocking. You could make a case, and I think it's negligible, that Kraft is the better route runner right now, although some people might disagree with me on that. But Musgrave is a more dynamic player. I think the Packers want the more dynamic player out there. I've been ignoring Kraft even in tight end premium leagues. I've been ignoring Kraft. You want to take him as your third tight end late, but while Musgrave's healthy, I really don't see a pathway for fantasy success. Jack, how do you feel about the Green Bay Packers tight end situation?
Yeah, I don't mind Kraft late, but I definitely think he's an underdog to play over Musgrave, and a pretty decent underdog, especially since he missed so much time through the offseason program and the preseason with the injury he had. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't mind him as like a late round flyer, but he's not someone I'm taking a ton of.
Jack Miller from Establish the Run joining me here on the show, on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Let's get back into who would you rather draft. Let's go with a guy who is not playing tonight in Hollywood Brown or Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams, who has seemingly had something get in his way every single time he's trying to break out, and this year could be the year for it. Hollywood Brown, he's with the Chiefs, and we've seen him do it in other places before, but Kansas City only gave him a 1-year deal, and we know he is hurt coming into the season. Right now, as far as ADP goes, because of that injury, Hollywood Brown has slipped to wide receiver 49 at the 908. That is one spot behind Jameson Williams, wide receiver 48 at the 906. Do you have a strong feeling here, Williams versus Brown? Jack, who would you rather draft this season?
Another one where I don't have a strong opinion, even though that's not really the exciting answer, but I think I would take Hollywood, and I think that's probably a little bit maybe unpopular. I like Jameson Williams too. I think he's super exciting with that speed and such a good offense, obviously, but we haven't really seen him earn targets even when he's been on the field. Last year when his snap share started to tick up, he really didn't get that many targets. He can obviously take any single target to the house, which is exciting. And with Josh Reynolds gone, I think he's going to be on the field a ton. But I mean, Marquise Brown in that Chiefs offense is someone that I've been drafting quite a bit as he's fallen. I'm not super well, just with the way I draft, a lot of times Hollywood ends up as like my fifth wide receiver. So it doesn't really matter to me that he's not playing tonight. Hopefully it doesn't matter. Hopefully my team doesn't have an injury and he can take next week off too. From what I've read, it seems like this is an injury where once he's back, he's going to be full of go. It doesn't really have any concerns beyond that. That's what David Chow said when he first suffered the injury. So as someone who, with the way I draft, I don't need him in week one. I'm taking Hollywood.
Let's get into some tight end conversation. It's an FFPC show, so who am I to deny viewers who want to talk about tight ends? Maiden Focus on YouTube leads things off. I think Cade Stover could surprise at tight end for the Texans. Former Ohio State teammate of C.J. Stroud. He's looked good in camp and could be a bargain if Schultz misses time, or maybe if Schultz doesn't miss time. So right now, Cade Stover, as far as the Fantasy Pros Championship goes, he's not being drafted at all. Is that a mistake? Should we be looking at him as a tight end 3 right at the end of the draft, Jack?
I don't think so. I think it's going to be Schultz. I don't think Stover sees the field a whole lot in his rookie season.
What about this guy, Colby Parkinson, who is being drafted, 16th, 17th round pick? This is a guy in Los Angeles who is going to be the beneficiary, or one of the beneficiaries at a minimum, of Tyler Higbee starting the season on the PUP list. And we know that he won't play the first 4 games of the season. We know the Rams love to throw the ball. We know they got 2 talented pass catchers, and you can make a case they got maybe 3 or 4 with Whittington and Robinson as well. Colby Parkinson as a late round tight end, does that do anything for you?
I do like him. I think especially in a managed league, if you're hurting for tight end, I think he could provide some solid production. Davis Allen played in a preseason game. Parkinson sat out the whole preseason. We know McVay likes to play absolutely no one if he can during the preseason. So that seems a little bit meaningful. I think if you're in like a best ball tournament, there's some risk that Higbee comes back in like week 10 or 11 or 12 and it becomes a split. So that would be my only concern in a best ball tournament. But for managed leagues, I mean, if I think Higbee, there's a pretty good chance that he does nothing the whole year. So especially in a managed format where if Higbee does come back and start to become a thorn in Parkinson's side, you can just part ways with him. I think he could be a pretty solid option in the interim.
Parkinson's interesting because I think in a bye week scenario, or if you're facing some injuries, then you could put him in as your second flex in the tight end premium scoring of an FFPC league. However, bye weeks are usually not very prevalent in September. And by the time they become prevalent, Tyler Higbee is going to be back. Now, maybe Higbee gets worked in slowly, but the fact of the matter is they're going to gum up the works. They're going to cannibalize each other. And Parkinson, I think, might be a wasted slot for the first. I know he's going to be a wasted slot for the first few months, or for the first month of the season. I don't see any fantasy output there. But as we get to October, depending upon how good Higbee looks, then maybe it makes more sense. And draft capital is very low. So, yeah, I think tight end 3 late, it makes a lot of sense. Permar 99, he thinks Parkinson's playing 95% of the snaps, 7 or 8 touchdowns this year. That's aggressive, but a non-zero chance of it happening. Bill Hollywood definitely agrees with them there. So there is some Parkinson love on the HSFF show tonight. Jordan Addison has been in the news for the wrong reasons this offseason, and he is now he still is the second option. Well, maybe you can make the case that he was the third option last year behind TJ Hawkinson. But Addison, the number 2 option in Minnesota this year, he has now been passed in ADP by a guy who's getting a lot of love from the high-stakes players, and that is Joshua Palmer out in Los Angeles. Palmer now is going as wide receiver 50 at the 10.05, Jordan Addison at the 10.10. Palmer could be the number 1 in Los Angeles to start. He may or may not finish as the number 1 this season, depending upon the evolution of Ladd McConkey adjusting to NFL life. So when it comes down to it, if you're drafting this weekend at Planet Hollywood in Las Vegas, or even from the comfort of your own home, what would you say, Jack Miller, to that person who is deciding between Jordan Addison and Joshua Palmer?
Yeah, I'm going Addison there. I do like Palmer too. At ETR, we were, compared to market, kind of outrageously high on Palmer compared to some sites.
Why is that? Why were you really high? Why were you guys really high on Palmer? What were the factors that went into that?
Yeah, he has earned targets in the past when in games where Keenan Allen and Mike Williams have missed games. He's had games where he's had a 20+% target share. There's a lot of guys out there who look like they're in line for big roles, and you can't really say that about it. It's more of a projection. Can this guy handle a big workload? Palmer is someone who, on a very limited sample, has shown the ability to command 20+% of targets when he absolutely has to. And with this pass catching core in LA, it kind of looks like he absolutely has to. So I think Palmer's in for a big role. I don't think he's some world-beating talent, so I think Addison has that ability. So I'm taking Addison, but it's definitely not out of a place where I dislike Palmer.
Okay, so based on everything you said about Palmer, does that mean you guys at ETR are a little bit lower on Ladd McConkey than market?
He's a guy where I discussed the Brock Bowers ceiling case earlier. Mm-hmm. Ladd is a guy where we have his ceiling juiced pretty much as high as anyone because they don't Palmer is a good NFL receiver. It's not like if Ladd McConkey is a really good player, he can't beat out Josh Palmer. But I think to start McConkey, DJ Chark is questionable, but I think there's a chance that McConkey only plays in 3 wide receiver sets in week 1. So on base exclusively, it's hard to get him up there, but we do have a ceiling juice because there's some chance that he takes the second half of the season. He's really good, and over the second half of the season, he's the number 1 wide receiver for Justin Herbert.
I can tell you for the Chiefs, Ravens that are scheduled to kick off in 12 minutes now. Players are on the field for the national anthems right now, and it looks like we will have football here shortly. So that's good news. And Travis Kelce, by the way, looking very Anthony Kiedis-like from the Red Hot Chili Peppers with the mustache and a little bit longer hair. Very interesting look. But listen, celebrity does different things to different people, for sure. Let's move on here. And I don't want to wrap this up yet because I want to get into some running backs here. Before we get into the running backs, Rashad Bateman, Wan'Dale Robinson, both these guys are going late. Bateman is a guy that John Harbaugh he's the type of guy where John Harbaugh, I think, has spent the whole offseason incorporating Rashad Bateman into every conversation he's having. Gets home and asks his wife what's for dinner. She answers lasagna, and he goes into a diatribe on why he thinks Rashad Bateman is going to be big this season. It's like every it's always talking about how big Bateman's going to be. And yet Wan'Dale Robinson, I just got out of a 10K draft, and one of the guys drafting there thinks that Wan'Dale Robinson is going to threaten Malik Nabers for the most receptions on the team this year. And I think that while that's probably not going to happen, I think Wan'Dale Robinson's a little bit underrated. You have a choice between these two players, Bateman or Robinson. Who would you rather draft, Jack Miller?
Yeah, I mean, if the reports are to be believed, Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews are going to watch Bateman and Isaiah likely each catch 100 balls this year. But obviously that's not going to happen. But I do prefer Bateman. The hype has been pretty relentless with Odell gone. It seems like he's in line to play a ton. He's another guy like Jameson Williams where even when he's been on the field a ton, the like efficiency on a per snap or per target basis has not been great, but he's very cheap. He's tied to a good quarterback. He's going to play a lot. I think he has a lot more like downfield ability than someone like Wan'Dale Robinson, who for him to hit his ceiling, he needs to catch 90 passes because they're all going to be like 8 or 9 yards. Whereas Bateman has a little bit more juice than that. So I'm going Bateman.
Yeah, and if anybody's drafting in the FFPC main event or the Fantasy Pros Championship, like Permar 99 did, you get the free look with Rashad Bateman tonight. So if he ends up exploding and has like a 6 for 90 and a touchdown or something like that, his ADP is obviously going to shoot up in drafts tonight and tomorrow with the FFPC. And if he stinks, well, then you can just leave him on the bench and see what happens going forward. Let's move on to running backs here, Jack. Talk about Zamir White and Javonte Williams. Zamir White is the guy with no Josh Jacobs in Las Vegas anymore. Javonte Williams, another guy that he was overweight, then he looked great. So he's had kind of a roller coaster off season as well. When you look at these two guys, I think Williams is going slightly ahead of Zamir White. Is that your preferred pick here as well?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Zamir White. I have barely touched him at all this year. I mean, his price is a lot different than I think it would have been in previous seasons, but still like the archetype of a 2-down back in a bad offense who has 4 career starts. He has low draft capital. Is just someone I'm not really looking to bet on.
When it comes to Javonte Williams over him, it's more of an indictment of White than it is an endorsement of Williams, right?
I'd say so. Yeah. I'm fine with Williams. I don't have a strong opinion, but I'm not a big Zamir White fan.
Now, I said the players I was going to ask you are basically all going next to each other in FFPC drafts, unless I say otherwise. Well, I'm about to say otherwise here on this one, Jack, because this is a situation of the Cincinnati Bengals having 2 guys competing for one spot, or at least the main spot, with the Bengals backfield this season. Chase Brown is going ahead of Zach Moss right now. Chase Brown is running back 28 at the 806. You could take him there, or you could wait and take Zach Moss as running back 36, basically a round and a half later at the 9-10. Who would you rather draft at their capital, Chase Brown or Zach Moss?
I think at cost, I'm taking Moss. In a vacuum, I'm agreeing with the market and taking Brown. I think Chase Brown is explosive. I graduated from Illinois. He obviously went to Illinois, so I like him in that regard. But I don't think that he's shown that much. He has low draft capital. Moss is one of those guys where he's not an exceptional talent, but I think NFL coaches trust him. So I think Moss is in week 1 going to be the leader in that backfield, both in short yardage and on third downs. I'm sure that Brown, given his big playability, they're going to scheme up touches for him in space and make sure that he gets his fair share of touches. But I think Moss probably leads that backfield. And I don't think Brown is like such an amazing talent that he just beats out Moss straight up or anything. So give me the round and a half discount and I'll take Zach Moss.
Permar 99 saying Chuba Hubbard over both. Is that how you feel as well this season? Is Hubbard in for a big year, even with the presence of Jonathan Brooks eventually at some point, we believe?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think week 1, Hubbard's going to get fed, but Jonathan Brooks is too scary given the draft capital and the talent that he has. So from a outside of the first month, I don't think Chuba is going to be super great for fantasy.
Maiden Focus on YouTube says Joe Burrow seems undervalued in drafts this year. IMO, and I kind of agree with I share his IMO. Like I have the same opinion as him. But then I look at it and I was drafting Burrow earlier, and then I'm kind of like, you know what? I really like the ability to get these guys who run as well. So the Anthony Richardsons, the Kyler Murrays, the Jaden Daniels of the world. And then I kind of was letting Burrow slip because I'd rather get those guys who are going to get more rushing yardage than Joe Burrow. Do you feel like Burrow is being undervalued in drafts like Maiden Focus does?
I think he's probably getting undervalued a little bit. I don't think that Stroud should be going that far ahead of him.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of similar bets. But I'm with you in that I'd rather take the guys that can run and that have, because you really, in this day and age, you kind of need that rushing ability to have a top 3 or maybe you can get top 3 just on passing, but to have QB1 overall ceiling, you really need that rushing.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that edge, and that's one of them. And so that's why I think Burrow gets disrespected a little bit by drafters right now. We move on from Burrow's teammates in Brown and Moss to another pair of running backs, Tyler Algier and Zach Charbonnet, both guys who are backups on their team, or at least the number 2 guy on their team. Algier behind Bijan Robinson, Charbonnet behind Kenneth Walker. However, both these guys may have a role regardless of if the starters in front of them are healthy or not. Algier or Charbonnet, which one would you rather draft this year, Jack?
I'm drafting both of them, but I think between these two, I'd take Charbonnet. He's probably a better pass catcher, better draft capital too. I mean, I like both of them. I think both have really good contingent upside, but Charbonnet between the two for me.
I think I would probably lean towards that way as well. Algier seemed, this is probably because they both played for the Falcons. He reminds me of Michael Turner a little bit in that he was an accumulator, right? Where he just needed volume in order to get fantasy value. And I don't think Charbonnet needs similar volume that Algier would. So that's why I lean Charbonnet there. We have not gotten into tight ends in this segment. I do want to do one here real quick, and it's a fun one. So when we look at the tight end situation, 2 tight ends, if they were both healthy, they would not be going close to each other in drafts, Jack. But because Hockenson is hurt right now, they are going very, very close to each other. In Fantasy Pros championship drafts right now, Tyler Conklin is tight end 16 at the 1108. TJ Hockenson, how did I screw this up? I might have screwed this up. Tight end 14 at the 1002. Okay, so I guess there is a little bit more of a difference than I thought. Maybe the ADP just changed since I put together the show rundown. I don't know. But Conklin or Hockenson, one guy is healthy and he's been steady Eddie the last 3 years. The other guy is not healthy, but when he is threatened to be the number 1 overall tight end. The Fantasy Pros Championship or the FFPC main event, which one would you rather have this year?
Yeah, I'm honestly not a huge fan of either of these guys. I guess I'd go Hockenson just for the late season upside, but I really have not been drafting Hockenson. I think it's going to be I saw a report that it's going to be week 10 or so is when they're shooting for him. So that's just a long time to hold a guy. And then once he is back, there's probably a pretty good chance that they ease him in. But I'm not super high on Conklin either. Just I don't think he's anything awesome as a talent. Near the end of the year, Jeremy Ruckert started to play a little bit more. He's the younger guy, and he has good draft capital attached to him too. So I think there's maybe some risk that Conklin doesn't have as firm a grip on the job. Probably later in the season. I think early in the season it's going to be Conklin. But come November, December, maybe they like what they see from Ruckert and want to get him the ball more. So I'm not a huge fan of either. But I'd take Hockenson, I think.
Yeah, and especially when you brought this up earlier. When do you get paid out in fantasy football? It's those last few weeks, right? And Hockenson could be a factor in those last few weeks. Conklin's fine, but if your season is going the way that you hope it's going, hopefully you're not focusing on and counting on Conklin points at that point. He's a good guy. He's like an appetizer to get you to the meal, but Hockenson is that tomahawk steak for sure. The tomahawk steak of the show tonight, Jack Miller from Establish the Run, bringing us perspectives on betting, props, as well as fantasy football drafts and week 1 prognostication as well. They're about ready to kick off in Kansas City between the Chiefs and the Ravens. Not there yet. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll bring you all the updates for the last 20 minutes of the show, as well as where Jack Miller stands on certain players in fantasy football drafts this year. You're watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
Flair once said, if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And if you want to be the man or woman this fantasy football season, you got to play over at myffpc.com. That's where all the best fantasy gamers play. That's where all the high stakes gamers play, because they've got the high stakes leagues. They have the best formats. They have the best payouts. It's the place to be. And if you win a FFPC main event or a Fantasy Pros Championship contest over there, you put some serious respect on your name and some money in your pocket. Anyone can win their hometown league, right? You're probably a great fantasy gamer. Prove it. You go out and win an event like this, you can go and put in your Twitter bio or X bio, FFPC main event champion. That means something. That's definitive proof that you're one of the best fantasy gamers in the world. So go over to myffpc.com and use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more, and now you're on your road to greatness, right? You could even do an online draft, or you can go and draft in Las Vegas with the stars. Draft at Planet Hollywood for the FFPC main event. That's where they're all doing it. It's awesome stuff. So get set up now so that you can be a star this year. You can be the man. Just like Ric Flair, you can be a champion. Woo!
Welcome back to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC at Eric Balkman on X. He's at Jack Miller02 on X. EstablishTheRun.com is where you can find his work. Hey, just over 300 teams remain in the FFPC main event. They went fast last year. Over the course of the next few days, they're going to go fast again, both tomorrow and Saturday. If you want to take another shot at winning a $1 million grand prize, go to myffpc.com, where you can register for the main event as well as the Fantasy Pros Championship there as well. $350 to enter that Fantasy Pros Championship, $1 million grand prize at stake there as well. We'll have drafts going on tonight after the game concludes, as well as all day tomorrow. And then after the Packers and Eagles get done Friday night, we'll have drafts going on, and then all day Saturday as well. myffpc.com is where to go for that. Jack Miller from Establish the Run. Let's get into some players and where you stand on them. We'll lead things off with the electric, although maybe inconsistent, Devon Achane in that Miami Dolphins backfield that's loaded. Raheem Mostert is there. Jalen Wright is there as well. You got to sink significant draft capital if you want Devon Achane on your team this year. He is going at the 209 right now, almost a mid-second round pick. Where do you stand on Achane?
I like Achane. I think he has game-breaking upside. So I definitely get the concerns about how many touches does he get. Can he stay healthy? His efficiency is going to crash. But I mean, his efficiency can crash and he can still have really strong efficiency. And I think he's just such a great talent and such a great offense with a coach who is maybe the best in the league at putting his players in position to succeed. So I'm pro Achane.
We're going to get some more answers on this player in the next couple of hours, but Isaiah Pacheco, currently running back 11 at the 305. That's in the Kyron Williams, Josh Jacobs territory. I think you and I are both excited to see how the Chiefs deploy Samaje Perine tonight, because it's going to change how we feel about Pacheco. What do you expect to see tonight between Perine and Pacheco for those of us, or those of you who missed the first hour of the program tonight? And where do you specifically stand on Isaiah Pacheco?
Yeah, I think the guys you mentioned, Kyron and Jacobs, I would take those guys over Pacheco with the Perine signing. But I still like Pacheco. I think he's in for a good season. I think they trust him a ton. I think down the stretch last year, it became pretty evident that Kelsey, Rice, and Pacheco were the three guys that they trusted. And I think that with Andy Reid and Mahomes, I think that that's like a meaningful thing to earn that trust. But with Pirine presumably taking the third downs eventually, maybe not tonight since he signed so recently, but eventually, I would take Kyron and Jacobs over him at least.
Bill Hollywood, who I spent some time with at the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship a couple of weeks ago, is asking in the YouTube chat right now, who will lock that wide receiver 2 in Washington right now? And there's some candidates there, right? There's De'Ami Brown, who I think is the highest drafted number 2 receiver that is in Washington right now after McLaurin goes off the board. However, you have Olamide Zaccheaus, who is threatening to be a guy that gums up the works. And you have the rookie, LMC. Luke McCaffrey there as well. Jack, who do you think is going to be the number 2 receiver in Washington? And I'll follow that up with how relevant is that going to be in fantasy football?
Yeah, I think if it's not Luke McCaffrey, it's not going to be relevant. I don't think it'll be McCaffrey in week 1, just based on how they used him in preseason. I think he's probably wide receiver 4 to start. I know they listed him as a starter on their depth chart, which I don't really know what to make of that. I think week 1, we're projecting Olamide Zaccheaus to be second in targets. But I mean, this is one where we'll see how it plays out because it's one where we don't really have a strong feel for it.
What about James Cook? Getting back on the running back track, things changed once Joe Brady took over last year for Ken Dorsey. Although I wouldn't exactly say Cook was the most efficient guy either. They have Ray Davis there as well. A lot of moving parts in the Buffalo backfield. Where do you stand on James Cook right now, Jack?
I'm fine with Cook. I worry that his lack of a role near the goal line with Josh Allen there. I mean, last year they just didn't play him near the goal line. Maybe Ray Davis or Ty Johnson becomes someone they use down there this year. But regardless, I don't think you can count on him to score many touchdowns. I think he's going to get the bulk of the carries between the 20s, and he's going to get a lot of catches. So I think that he's a solid bet compared to other guys going around him I think his median is pretty good. I don't think he has elite upside with the lack of a goal line role and the likely involvement of a second running back there.
Yeah, and I think and he was going that tier we were just talking about, the Kyron Williams, Josh Jacobs, Isaiah Pacheco tier. He is basically like a half tier below that at the end of the 4th round. If you want to get James Cook on your team. Rico Dowdle, we talked about him a little bit already. I want to skip over him and to get to Gus Edwards because we have not talked about the Chargers backfield really at all tonight. J.K. Dobbins is there as well. Kamani Vidal. I'm seeing all 3 of these guys drafted, but nobody's sinking serious draft capital into them at Planet Hollywood this weekend for the FFPC live events. But specifically Gus Edwards, and I'll bring up his ADP here I'll couch it with that. Gus Edwards, running back 39, 1008. Jack, where do you stand on him right now?
Yeah, Edwards is a guy where, I'll take him if he's there. I'm not anti-Edwards, but he's not a guy I'm going into a draft saying I want Gus Edwards. Mm-hmm. And I think there's other guys going around him who I generally prefer. I think he's going to get the first crack at the carries, and I think Harbaugh wants this to be a running team. But we saw a pretty decent decline in his efficiency last year. And I mean, it's just hard to rely on him for an entire season. It's hard to rely on Dobbins and a day 3 rookie too. So I get it. But yeah, I'm fine with him. He's all right at ADP, in my opinion.
And yeah, I mean, it's that there's no such thing as a bad pick in the 10th round or beyond. So it makes sense for Gus Edwards there as well, if you want to take a shot on him. I do have a specific stance on this guy right here, but I won't reveal it yet. Will Shipley, I see drafted quite a bit at the end of drafts, running back 66, mid 17th round right now. I'll keep my thoughts to myself here. Will Shipley, Jack Miller, where do you stand on him?
Yeah, so this is a pretty simple answer. I know Sean Siegel likes Shipley a lot, and so I like him. I that's pretty much the extent of it. I draft Shipley because I know I have such respect for for Sean's evaluations.
And he is smart too. I mean, when it comes, I mean, Sean has won a ton of money doing this. But I think that's interesting with Shipley. That my counter to that, and I have not been drafting Shipley. I have been drafting Kenneth Gainwell quite a bit. Boston Scott isn't there anymore. And Gainwell is a guy that I believe, and I know that Shipley was working with the ones part of training camp this year. But I believe if Barkley were to miss time, I think Gainwell takes over that backfield and Shipley kind of just works in. So for me, I know it's less sexy. He's not the rookie. He's not the ballyhooed guy here. But I think that when push comes to shove, I'm not playing either one of these guys while Barkley's healthy. But if he's not, I think Gainwell's the guy I'd be more likely to start, which is why I've been drafting him a little bit more. However, you see it a little bit differently. Maybe Shipley has the higher upside.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to really is I think at this point we kind of know what Kenny Gainwell is.
Right.
Shipley
surprises with Gainwell anymore.
Yeah, right. Shipley is a black box, and I think with guys who are going so late, I prefer the unknown. But I definitely get what you mean there.
And that's the thing too. Like this is something we preached on this show since we went on the air 3 years ago or whatever it was. Like, take doubles, swing for doubles, maybe the first few rounds, but man, you should be taking home run hacks like those last 5-6 rounds at a minimum of your drafts for sure. And Will Shipley, no question, is a home run hack. We did talk about Malik Nabers earlier. We'll skip over him and move to Brian Thomas, the rookie receiver in Jacksonville, who is going to be contending for targets with Gabe Davis, with Christian Kirk, with Evan Engram there as well. Where do you stand on Brian Thomas, Malik Nabers, collegiate teammate, and now he's going to a situation where he's going to have to fight for everything he gets there as well?
Yeah, I like Thomas. I've come around on him a bunch throughout the summer. I think when he was first drafted, I was a little bit so-so on him, but now I'm a big fan. It seems like he's going to start and play a ton right away. I like Christian Kirk. I'm not sure he has like top 5 upside at the position. I think Gabe Davis is fairly well established in terms of like what he does. So Thomas to me seems like the guy who could really just break through and become the wide receiver 1 by the end of the year. Obviously not expecting that week 1, but by week 12, I think that Thomas is the guy in Jacksonville on that good offense who has like truly massive upside.
Was there something specific that maybe that you thought about Brian Thomas this year initially where you're kind of like, this is a guy I'm probably not going to get on a whole lot of my teams. But then as the summer went on, you evolved and you became a fan of him. Can you talk about the factors that went into that made you kind of change your mind on Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, at first it was kind of just, he didn't do a whole lot until his final season at LSU. I saw some stuff on Twitter from some of the more tape-oriented people that maybe he has some red flags in terms of his ability to transition to the NFL and be productive right away. But, I mean, the size and athleticism combo on a good offense, on a team that has good receivers, but they don't have like a true alpha wide receiver 1, and the fact that they seem to believe in him already and want to get him time right away has me into Thomas.
And ultimately, there's only going to be so many targets to go around in Jacksonville. Let's take Gabe Davis out of this for a second because, he's the last guy going. Do you believe that Kirk, Thomas, or let me frame it like this: who has the biggest bust potential at their ADP between Kirk, Engram, and Brian Thomas right now?
I think it's pretty easily Thomas. Just we haven't seen him do it in the NFL. Kirk and Engram are proven effective target earners. So yeah, it's definitely Thomas for me in terms of the lowest floor.
Zay Flowers picks up a big third down conversion here as the Ravens are driving thanks to a Justice Hill third down conversion earlier in the drive. Ravens now have the ball 1st and 10 at roughly, the Chiefs' 31-yard line. We'll keep you abreast on what's going on with that going forward these last few minutes of the show here. Where do you stand on Kyler Murray? We kind of talked about rushing quarterbacks in general earlier on in the program here. But I think Kyler Murray is a guy that's really caught steam with fantasy players right now. Quarterback 6 at the 707. He's behind Stroud. He's ahead of Richardson. I don't think this is hot takey, but maybe it is. I would take him over CJ Stroud right now, 8 times out of 10. Where do you stand on Kyler Murray, Jack?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I'd take Richardson over him, over Kyler, though, just with the rushing ability. But Kyler has, enough rushing to flirt with like true top tier upside. The Cardinals defense does not look like they're going to be able to stop a whole lot of teams this year. So I think they could be in a ton of shootouts. Now Kyler actually has good receiving weapons with Trey McBride's breakout at the end of last season, as well as obviously Marvin Harrison. So yeah, I'm a fan of Kyler at ADP. I think he's one of those mid-round QBs with truly elite upside.
Permar99 pointing out, it's all flowers so far. Derrick Henry getting stuff left and right, and they're cutting up this Chiefs defense here moving forward. One of the players that I thought we'd get into at some point, and we sort of never did, and that's fine. I'll bring him up right now. Caleb Williams, the number 1 overall pick of the draft. We haven't really talked about. We talked about his receivers a little bit. Now, Jack, are you a Bears fan?
No.
You're not a Bears fan. Okay. But you are close to the situation in Chicago, right?
Yeah, I'm in Chicago.
Okay. So very, very close. Inside the situation, one might say. So you look at Caleb Williams, the number 1 pick of the draft, who is going to be the quarterback for the Bears this year, maybe set up better than any other number 1 overall pick in NFL history as far as the quarterback goes, with the running back that they have there, the tight ends, both of them, in Kmet and Everett, and then the trio of wide receivers. Where do you stand on Caleb Williams, knowing that you can get him right now in an FFPC main event at the 1102 as quarterback 12?
I like that price on him. I think he's like a once every 5 years prospect at QB. He's mobile enough to make an impact fantasy-wise rushing. So he has a ton of weapons. I mean, this is a pretty loaded offense. So I like Caleb at that price.
A pair of called runs for Lamar Jackson has the Ravens knocking on the door inside the 5-yard line. I think it's going to be second and short from about the 3. We'll see what happens. Maybe this is King Henry's coronation as a Baltimore Raven, and maybe he'll get the ball here. We'll bring that up. Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels? You can only have one. Who would it be this year? Is it Daniels?
Yeah, I'm taking Jaden there for the rushing.
The Bears offense in general, compared to what it was last year with Justin Fields, to compared to what we think it's going to be with Caleb Williams right now, slight uptick, no difference, or at least a insignificant difference, or massive difference this year?
I think it's going to be a pretty big difference, especially with the weapons they've added.
With the Bears at the end of the season, what are we talking with them? Are we talking that Caleb Williams was able to he was able to keep ADP value for all 3 receivers this year, Allen, Odunze, and Moore? Or is that because if he does, he might even be the better pick over Jaden Daniels?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see all 3 guys live up to their ADP. I think it's hard for 3 receivers on a single team to all live up to their ADP. But I think that, like, as individual bets, I think they're all decent. I mean, we talked earlier, I think Moore and Rome are the 2 bets I prefer to make. But if you treat them as individual bets, I don't think all 3 are going to hit at once, but I think that they're all fine.
Derrick Henry does plunge into the end zone from 3 yards out, and it is 7-0 after Justin Tucker nails the extra point on the opening drive of the game. The Baltimore Ravens march down, and King Henry gets his first touchdown as a Raven. We had Jack Miller on tonight from EstablishTheRun.com at JackMiller02. Jack, can for anybody who enjoyed your appearance, and that was everybody, by the way, who great job in the chat room tonight, everybody. If they're looking for more Jack Miller content, what's the best way to find it, and how can they follow you throughout the season? Is just following you on X? Is that the best way to find out everything you're producing?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at JackMiller02. But in terms of content, I will be posting an article every Tuesday with usage notes on every fantasy relevant NFL game and player from the previous week. So content wise, that is going to be the bulk of what I'm doing.
All right, let's get this. The season starts tonight. Super Bowl prediction: who beats who come February, or this coming February, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be boring, I think, and
Kansas City?
I'm going to take the Chiefs. I never bet against Mahomes, although obviously not an ideal start here. So maybe tonight you should have bet against Mahomes. But for the season, for the Super Bowl, I'm taking Mahomes. I think in terms of what I think it's going to be, I think that the Niners are the logical choice. But I think the Eagles are going to have a big resurgence this year. Kellen Moore at OC, Jalen Hurts is actually healthy now. So I guess that would be, it's not much of a sleeper, but I'll take the Eagles as the Super Bowl loser, NFC champion.
The most owned fantasy player that you have this year, do you know who it is off the top of your head?
Let me look.
Because I'm always curious about this for anybody who is, because there's gonna be a lot of FFPC players still drafting over the course of the next 72 hours or whatever it is. And after we talked with you about, God, I don't know how many dozens of players we got through tonight, I'm very curious to find out if there is one player, if the cheese does stand alone, and who that cheese is for you, Jack.
Yeah, let me look. Oh, it's. I don't know if I can see anymore, or at least I have a ton of Jacobs. I know that he was in my top
Josh
3.
Jacobs. Okay.
I have a ton. He's in my top 3. I don't think he's number 1. I don't remember who number 1 is. But I think he's 2nd or 3rd for me.
And he'll be in action Friday night. We'll be in action next Thursday when we resume this show, 7 o'clock until 9. I believe I have on Sam Hoppen from Fantasy Pros. We'll be on next week. Remember to play the FFPC main event, the Fantasy Pros Championship, over at myffpc.com. Both of those contests, $1 million grand prize. Time's running out for you to register for those. Enjoy the game tonight. After the game, register for some drafts. We'll have them going on starting at midnight Eastern time. Otherwise, they'll resume at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Jack, once again, so much fun to hang out with you and pick your brain about everything. Thank you so much for skipping the first part of the game tonight to hang out with me. That's awesome. I'll let you go enjoy it and have a great season. Keep up all the great work at ETR.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This was a blast as always.
Absolutely. Establish the runs. Jack Miller at JackMiller02 on the X joining me tonight. MyFFPC.com is where to go for the main event in the Fantasy Pros Championship. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Football's back. It's here. I'll let you enjoy the game tonight. Thanks so much for watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. For Jack Miller, I'm Eric Balkman. See you next week.